Well, again, good morning. Didn't get to introduce myself earlier. My name's Adam Hildebrandt. I get to be one of the pastors here at LVfirst, and it is such a privilege to be a part of this worship service this morning, this opportunity for us to celebrate together. If you're new here this morning, I just want to say a special welcome. We're so glad that you're here. We're doing a lot of family business today. This is something important, but we want you to see that this is a place that invests in the next generation, that really believes in young people and what God is doing in their lives and what God might do in the church through their hope, through their ministry, through what they have to show us all already. In fact, I don't know that I need to preach a sermon. I could probably just play that video again and go sit down. But I'm going to preach a sermon anyway. I wrote it. I might as well walk through it. So just a couple of things before we get rolling into the scriptures this morning. Today's kind of one of those transition weeks in the church calendar in terms of the Christian year. Like there are these different high and holy seasons. You heard that Wednesday night is Ash Wednesday, and so I would encourage you to be here and be a part of our service at 6:30. That's a unique experience. But as we begin the season of Lent, as we push towards the season of Lent, today is not only Confirmation Sunday, it's Transfiguration Sunday. And so we're going to share a story from the Scriptures about an experience that Jesus and his young disciples had together, this experience of transfiguration. And then next week, we're going to start a new series we're calling Flip the Script. And that's going to be the series we're going to be working on throughout Lent. And we're going to be talking through the book of Philippians. Philippians really flips the script on a lot of the things that we think about, the way that we think about power and privilege and all of the things that we have in this world, what Jesus demonstrated for all of us through his life, death, and resurrection. And so we'll be working through Philippians. And these cards are for you to take. They're on all the tables. And just invite somebody to come and be a part of these services with us throughout the season of Lent. So 40 days, and we get to spend time together talking about what Jesus invites all of us to live into. But today is Confirmation Sunday. It's a day of celebration. We get to celebrate the work that God has done, is doing in each of these lives, in each of these young people's lives, but also in each of their families, and the work that God has done here in this church through you, through the way that you love these young people, the way that you've walked with these young people. Some of you from the time that they were born have walked with them. You've seen them grow. You've promised to pray for them. You've shown up in all sorts of different ways. You've loved their parents well. You have done such a good job of being the church that these young people want to say yes to this church, say yes to being a part of this experience. One of the things that I've been really interested in is rites of passage. And we don't have a whole lot of rites of passage in our culture. In American culture, that's not a big thing for us. I remember a number of years ago being in Kenya, and we took a trip out to the Masai Mara, and we got to have dinner with some of the Maasai tribe there. And one of the elders was talking about this experience that they have for their young men when they're becoming men, and they send them out into the wilderness, and they have to kill a lion, which I was like, that's cool, right? I mean, I like lions, but like that's a cool experience. That's something that transitions these young men into knowing that they're men, and the whole community understands it as well. So I came home from that, and my eldest Caleb was like 10 or 11 at that point, and I started thinking, okay, we got to kill a lion, right? I mean, you can't do that here. So we had to think about other things that we could do. And so we kind of created this experience for him. I mean, he was going through confirmation as well, but we created this opportunity for him to grow and learn a little bit more, to have some one-on-one time with me, but also to end all of that with an experience that we did together. And so we decided to do this kayaking trip together. And so we went up just south of Helen and on the Chattahoochee River, and we put in one afternoon, and we were gonna float 2 days, and we were gonna only eat what we catch, which is a terrible plan. I just want to be clear. I think of myself as a pretty good fisherman, but you shouldn't necessarily trust in that reality. And it was difficult, and it was hard, and it pushed us. And we learned a lot about ourselves. Because about 5 minutes into the trip, as happens very often in the mountains in the summer, the skies opened up, and it was pouring down rain. And on and off throughout that whole day, it would rain and then stop and rain and stop, and it was cold, and we were wet. And it was a long paddle, and you were sitting in a seat the whole time. And at one point, I just remember, we were coming up on this little fall line area where the river dropped really quickly, and there were some heavy rapids. And I got my kayak stuck on a rock, and Caleb somehow got his kayak turned around backwards. And all I see is him screaming, going backwards over the fall line, and he just disappeared. And I'm stuck on this rock thinking, okay, I got to get off this rock, and then I've also got to come up with a good explanation to tell his mother about what happened, all the things that dads do when something goes wrong. And so finally, I get off the rock and I go down this fall line as well, and Caleb's off on the side of the bank, and he's screaming, and I was like, "Are you hurt? Are you hurt?" And he said, "No, but I hit that rock, and all of these spiders jumped in my boat, and so I had to kill them all." And he was. Wasn't quite a lion, but I mean, this experience is the same, right? It was this important experience, this rite of passage. Maybe it didn't go exactly like we planned, and maybe that is the point. Because in a lot of ways, These rites of passage orient people, they instruct us, they challenge us, they mentor us, they celebrate us, and they validate this passage into adolescence and then adulthood. And I think oftentimes when we don't have these moments, when we don't have confirmation, when we don't have these parts of our lives that celebrate these transitions, that acknowledge that there is difficulty, that there are things that we have to overcome, we really wrestle with finding an anchor when things challenge us later in life. I think we have generations of adults who struggle in difficulty because they've never struggled before. And so much of our identity is formed in moments like that. But if we don't have these coming-of-age experiences, these opportunities for young people to wrestle with who they are and what they believe, then we fall back into our individualistic society where we just don't have these experiences, and all of these pseudo experiences become the experiences that shape generations. And so the challenge is for the church and for parents and for people who care about young people is to work out how do we do this in a culturally appropriate context, pulling in the community and inviting people to see who God is making them to be. Anthropology has a word for this. It's a liminal experience. It's this in-between time. It's this transition time. It's a threshold moment. So much of our identity is shaped on these moments that we might call mountaintop moments. We remember back to them so vividly. I remember my confirmation when I was 13 at the First United Methodist Church of Tarpon Springs. That's a good-looking young man. I wish I had more church community around me to talk to me about that haircut, though. I did have hair, just in case you've ever wondered about that. At some point, I had hair. I don't know that I did the best things with it, and so because of my terrible haircuts, I think the Lord took my hair away. I'm just kidding. That's not how God works. That's not how God works. But I remember that moment. But it wasn't the only moment in my life. But a few weeks before that, a few months before that, I had said yes to Jesus in my life. And then I got to go through this confirmation experience. I got to learn all these things about who God was and who God had made me and how I might engage with God and these foundational experiences. And then that moment of confirmation was this moment that I remember that anchored my life as things got difficult. Because as they always do, things got difficult in a hurry. It wasn't long after this experience that my mom made the decision to come to Emory and to complete her master's degree there. And so we had just built this community. I just said yes to this church, and now we're picking up and moving. It wasn't long on the mountain before we found a valley to walk through. So our scripture this morning comes from Luke chapter 9, and it's this same sort of experience for the disciples. This experience that's so incredibly important, that shapes them, that shapes their understanding. And I'm going to read you the whole story, and then we're just going to talk through it really quick. It says this in Luke chapter 9, verse 28. Now about 8 days later, which is important, about 8 days after these sayings that Jesus had said, he took with him Peter and John and James, these young men, these young disciples who were learning from Jesus, who were following Jesus, who were walking in the way of their rabbi. And they went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. That's Jesus. And his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They had appeared in glory and were speaking about his departure. Now, in Greek, that word is exodus, about his exodus, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. And just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing or knowing what he had said. And while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them. And they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent. And in those days told no one any of the things that they had seen. And on the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met them. Identity is shaped on the mountain. It's shaped in these high and holy moments. But identity is put to the test in coming down the mountain. It's put to the test in the valley. The disciples go up with Jesus on the mountain 8 days after Jesus had said these things. The things that he had said were these. Jesus sat with his disciples and they had a faith conversation. Jesus said, hey, guys, we've been hanging out for a little bit. You've been learning from me. I've been sharing a lot of things. You've seen a lot of miracles. Who do people say that I am? And they kind of walk through some of the answers. Well, some people say you're Elijah or maybe one of the other prophets. And then Jesus gets a little bit more serious. Okay, I'm not worried about people. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Peter pipes up. Oh, you're the Messiah, the Son of God. This is the first recognition of Jesus as who he is, who he came to be. Peter understands and realizes something unique and special. And then Jesus begins to teach them about what's going to happen. Jesus says, that's correct. You're right. I am the Messiah. Thanks for realizing that. Here's what's going to happen. If you want to follow me, if you want to follow the Messiah, you're going to have to take up your cross and follow me, because I'm headed to Jerusalem to give my life. This is the first time that Jesus predicts his death in the Gospel of Luke. And they're not sure what to do with that. They're not sure how to reconcile that. They're not sure on that side of Jesus' death and resurrection what Jesus means and how Jesus might be talking about this. But he invites them to think about the fact that this will get difficult, that it won't always be perfect, that life will throw lots of things in the way. But he takes them up onto the mountain 8 days later. Takes 3 of them. And they have this amazing experience. Moses and Elijah show up, the law and the prophets all being fulfilled in Jesus. And they're having a conversation about his exodus. It's like rich with Old Testament imagery. All of this stuff is happening, and the first readers would have been like, oh, I see the exodus. I see what God's doing. God's bringing a new exodus in and through Jesus. A new experience of freedom, of hope, of possibility. And Peter, again, not shy to speak up, has this experience and says, boom, this is it. We should stay here. Let's set up camp. Right? Peter falls back on what he's seen in his life. He knows that the Exodus is this big experience for his people, for the Jews at that time. And as a part of their celebration, they would have what's called the Festival of Booths, where they'd set up tents and they'd go and live in tents just to remind them of what it was like when they came through the wilderness. And so Peter says, let's do that again. Let's stay right here. Let's experience this moment. Let's set up a tabernacle. Let's set up a tent, not realizing that Jesus is the new tabernacle and Jesus goes with us wherever we go. We don't have to set up a tent because Jesus is with us on the mountain and in the valley. But I think so often we make mental monuments out of certain moments in our lives and assume that every other day is going to be like that every day is Sunday. Wait, are you guys not excited about Sunday? Every day is going to be like Easter. We're always going to have brass and big music and we're all going to dress up. We kind of make these ideas in our mind, these mental monuments of what things should be like. And when they don't shape up and when they don't end up like that, we kind of default back to these mental models of what was. And gosh, I am so glad I don't still look like this. Because life moves forward and we have to too. Not that I wouldn't love to have the energy of this young man, not that I wouldn't love to have maybe some of the hair of this young man, not that I wouldn't love to go back and do some things differently. But you couldn't pay me enough to be a teenager again. And I have learned so much about who God is in the world and in my life. And that moment was important, but it wasn't the only moment. There are so many moments. Some in deep, difficult valleys, some on high, incredible mountains. In fact, if we look at the topography of this moment, if we look at this map of where Jesus and his disciples were, many scholars point to Mount Tabor. That's kind of the traditional spot of the Mount of Transfiguration. But other scholars say, no, Jesus and his disciples were up in Caesarea Philippi, so it's probably more likely that they were at Mount Hermon, even higher up into the mountains. That they were on this peak, that they were in this place where they were way up, they could see everything. But the next day they had to do what? They come down off the mountain. And they were headed towards Jerusalem, the other end of the map. So if we take all the names off of the map, what we end up with is a picture of most of our lives. Right? There are these high, amazing moments, and there are these low, difficult times. We come down the mountain. In fact, when the disciples come down the mountain with Jesus, they're immediately not doing what they're supposed to do. They try to cast out the demon, and they can't do it, and so Jesus has to come and be like, oh my gosh, guys, come on. And then, a couple of verses later, they're arguing about who's the greatest among them. Completely missing the point of so much of what Jesus has said. They come down into the valley. But it's what they heard on the mountain that shapes their ability to go through the valley and up the next mountain. God says, "This is my son, the chosen. Listen to him." Listen to him. Not like right now, but like the way the Greek implies is continually listening to him. Continually listen to Jesus. Continually follow him. Continually allow him to shape and form your life, because it's not just a moment. It's all of them. And if we set up monuments in the past, sometimes they get in the way of allowing us to live into God's future for us. Because we can't be who we were, we can only be who we are becoming. Or I love the way St. John of the Cross says it, the 16th century mystic, who says that the dark night of the soul is the space between who you were and who you will become. It's that valley experience that feels so difficult. And young people today might feel like one of those mountain moments. But there will be difficulty. And you'll have to lean on listening to Jesus. Not just on your own, but in community. Just like so many of the adults in this room who have prayed for you and loved you and cared for you have done. And they can share their stories. And you can hear about how God has moved in their lives. How they listen to Jesus even in those dark nights, even in those difficult times. How those things, listening to Jesus and following him, began to shape who they were, because there will be difficult times. There will be moments where we feel struggle and strife, because we want it to be flat and easy. We want joy without sacrifice. We want character without suffering. We want success without failure. We want gain without pain. We want testimony without the test. And we want it all without going all in. Those moments shape the movement of God in the rest of our lives.